good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our presentation today, which is going to be on technical malfunctions. For those of you studying for your ICAO exam over here, the focus in the module session today is not on technical language. The ICAO exams do not focus on all the words that we use every day on the flight deck. However, one thing that we should all note when we're using an acronym, and the acronym, for example, would be like ECAM, which is electronic centralized aircraft monitor, and that's basically our Airbus system. Or when we're dealing with ICAS, which is engine indicating crew alerting system. It is always better in this type of language proficiency exam to use the whole word, not to use the acronym, because that shows that you have an understanding of the vocabulary, and that is what I will be doing here today. So let's get into technical malfunctions. And again, in this module, we're going to focus on that essential vocabulary, and as I've just pointed out to you, you will need to understand some more technical language for airline ground school training, but for the purposes of ICAO, not necessary for these exams. Our focus is on today technical malfunctions on the aircraft on the ground or while the aircraft is in flight. It's one of the most normally common unexpected events which can cause much additional communication in plain English, as you would do in your native language, wherever you are in the world, between the flight crew and the controllers. First describing the malfunction, then discussing its consequences and agreeing on a solution. One of the ways that we focus on this as well is that we have a problem. Therefore, the methodology we use for ICAO is, you need to be asking questions so you can actually provide advice. Sometimes we call this questions and advice. Otherwise, in ICAO, this is called interactions in the 6 language proficiency requirements. On the screen here, in the bottom picture, you can see a non-routine event, basically unscheduled maintenance. In other words, you arrive at the airport to discover that you have a problem with your brakes or your tire. Therefore, we need to be looking specifically at that basic vocabulary, what we do, how we understand it. When we're looking at communications, it doesn't matter which exam you're taking, there are some basics that we need to understand. And when we're understanding an audio, what we need to do and understand is who is speaking, what is the message, what is the problem. For example,
the captain's PFD and ND have just gone blank.
So you're probably thinking to yourself, what was that? What vocabulary do I know? What vocabulary don't I know? There is some basic vocabulary. Let's take a look. What we're referring to here is the primary flight display and main display have just gone blank. What's interesting here is that just gone blank in this moment is pilot speaking. Listen again.
The captain's PFD and ND have just gone blank.
Okay. Let's take a look at more vocabulary that we're going to use. For example,
we seem to have a flap system failure and are unable to extend the flaps for landing.
So here we got the pilot saying that they have a flap system failure, but the main problem is they're unable to extend the flaps for landing. Consequences of that, you're landing too fast, too long, etc. But we need to understand what is the problem and what are the consequences and who is speaking.
We seem to have a flap system failure and are unable to extend the flaps for landing.
We have a hydraulic problem, but all systems remain serviceable at the moment. We'll advise any change.
This is what we call a precautionary message. What's a precautionary message? The pilot's advising that, hey, we got a problem, but everything looks okay, but we're going to update you. So this is typical of the type of messaging we might hear on frequency. It's also typical of the type of messaging you might hear in a communication, in an audio that you would have to read back with all the relevant information and who is actually speaking. One more time on that last one.
We have a hydraulic problem, but all systems remain serviceable at the moment. We'll advise any change.
I can actually change that a different way around because I don't necessarily have to use exactly the same words. What I'm trying to show the examiner is I understand what's being said. So here we've got pilot advising he's going to update us. He seems to have a hydraulic problem, but all the systems seem to be okay at this moment in time. It's a difference in your technique. Someone with a higher level of English will, what we call paraphrase, will not copy the audio, but interpret the audio and show that they understand it in that framework. Let's move on to technical difficulties. This is what we're here to discuss today. So obviously, one of the main problems when we have a technical difficulty is a delay. So when we're thinking about what questions and what advice I would give, please place yourself in the shoes of an airline, an ATP pilot, a commercial ATP pilot. What do I mean by that? When I've got a problem with maintenance, how am I thinking as a captain or first officer? I'm thinking of, is the aircraft serviceable? Can I continue? I'm on the ground. How long is going to be the delay? And so obviously I'm communicating with the company and I'm communicating with maintenance to try and coordinate how I'm actually going to manage this unscheduled or unexpected maintenance that I now have on the ground and how it's going to impact me. That means I'm communicating with my ground personnel, but I'm also communicating with the company, with operations, with the cabin crew, and also obviously if I've got passengers on board, I'm trying to keep them updated. As we have discussed in a previous module, the value statement for example, a low-cost carrier, and here in Colombia, where I'm based, a low-cost carrier could be Viva, it could be Latam, it could be Copa Wingo in that respect. The primary concern for the flight crew, and please keep this in your mind as new pilots and pilots that are progressing in our industry, that the airline is looking at you to manage OTD, on time departure. Therefore, you need to coordinate what is actually happening on the ground to make sure it runs efficiently. Therefore, when we're asking questions, we'll be focused more on, where are they? How long is it going to take? And when we're giving advice, update me so I can advise everybody else. That's how we have to think as commercial airline transport pilots. And there's your notion. The notion is that a flight delay can also be very costly for the airlines. So you're under a lot of pressure from your company to maintain schedule. And therefore, we need to know how long it's going to take to fix the problem. Also, our focus in the exam, there is some confusion. Pilots think, am I flying or am I on the ground? For the purposes of the exam, the best context is to think that you're on the ground. So when you have a problem, did you call the company? How long is it going to take? Are the obvious questions for them to come and repair it. So we need to focus that way around. You also have to remember, folks, that it doesn't matter which ICAO exam you're taking, there is a time limit for the exam. Therefore, your responses have to be clear and concise. So if we start to look at problems, what can go wrong will go wrong. Like what system failures might a flight crew experience? These are the type of problems that we might encounter normally on the ground, maybe when we're going through a walk-around inspection, that would cause, for example, in whichever exam you're taking, okay, you got a problem, what are you going to do? What questions are you going to ask and what advice are you going to give? And we'll be focusing on all these areas today, such, for example, low engine oil level. missing static discharges, worn or damaged tires. The list is here. So there's a lot of problems we can actually focus on here. The technique is logic. It's not a formula in that sense. Is what questions do I need to know? I'm working for the company. I have to manage this, okay? And I think that's the best focus moving forward. One has to remember that, you know, for airlines in recruitment, 50% of the process is okay on your ability to fly. 50% is on your ability to manage a situation and communicate, which might not be directly related to actual physical flight, like flying the aircraft. Problem solving, basically, and how you're going to do it. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to roll some audios. I'll play them twice, all right? The concept of the audio is to introduce words that are common, that you need to know in the context of the ICAO exams. Not to learn the audio, but to learn, for example, how the communication sequences, what is the message, what is the key vocabulary, what do they want, what are their intentions, what are the requests, etc. Let's take a look and listen.
Situation 8.
We suspect that the gear hasn't lowered completely. Could you give us a visual check?
Okay, so there's some interesting things in this audio. Let's play it again.
Situation 8.
We suspect that the gear hasn't lowered completely. Could you give us a visual check?
It's quite common when people are reading back and they're asked to read back an audio in the exam that they might omit information that changes the meaning of the actual audio. In this particular audio, the omission could be completely. We suspect that the gear hasn't lowered. Can you give us a visual check? Is different. We suspect that the gear hasn't lowered completely. So completely becomes a key word because it indicates that the gear is down and locked, as opposed to it's lowered, but we don't know. And what they're actually asking for here is a visual check, a low pass, past the tower. Okay. One of the most common words used in English that people have difficulty with is the word coming up in this audio ahead.
Situation 4.
We felt and heard the nose gear extend, but we can't see a green light.
Again.
Situation 4.
We felt and heard the nose gear extend, but we can't see a green light.
Okay, complication in that, because what did the pilot say? Again, she. Again, my recommendation when you're responding to an audio, I've heard this many times working around the world, is that people, when they respond to the audio, he said, that would be incorrect because it's a she in this case. So the first point here would be to say, just use the word pilot, because then it can be he or she. Therefore, technically, you're not incorrect by calling a female pilot a male pilot. So we say, the pilot said, what did the pilot say? The pilot said that they felt, that's important, sincere in Spanish, and heard the nose gear extend. And now we're using a contraction to complicate it, but we can't see a green light. Your read back when you hear a contraction should be clearer. We cannot, because otherwise, depending where you are in the world on your pronunciation, it might not be clear. We cannot. We are unable. Negative on the green light is better than can't, the contraction that the audio is actually using.
Situation 4.
We felt and heard the nose gear extend, but we can't see a green light.
Okay. Again, if you're listening to an audio and you don't understand the vocabulary, that can be a problem. For example, in this audio here, we're introducing a technical word. Let's take a look and listen.
Situation 7.
We're not receiving data link messages at the moment. We're trying to find out why.
Okay, so we're introducing here the word data link. For those of you that don't know what data link is, I'll use the acronym C, Charlie, Papa, Delta, Lima, Charlie. Controller Pilot Data Link Communications, CPDLC. Basically, depending where you are in the world, this is a different way of communicating with ATC. We're using basically a text messaging system similar to what you're using on your smartphone. ATC sends you a clearance and you type in yes or no. Can we use this on short haul flights? Not really, because of the congestion of traffic. For example, if I was flying Bogota, Medellin, I'm not using CPDLC. But if I'm flying Bogota to Madrid, some of my clearances will be coming oceanic and will come through CPDLC for flight level. So how do we hear it in the exam?
Situation 7.
We're not receiving data link.
Situation 7.
We're not receiving data link messages at the moment. We're trying to find out why.
I put a picture here of on flight deck here to give you an idea of where you're located. There it is right in front of you. CPDLC, basically giving you your clearances and also messaging system with ATC.